Welcome. This webinar organized by the Global Alliance for Tax Justice ahead of the next negotiation sessions for the United Nations Framework Convention on International Tax Cooperation. It's great to see so many familiar names and also new ones joining from different movements and regions. I'm Tomás Lukin. I'm the campaigns and advocacy coordinator for the Global Alliance for Tax Justice in Latin America. I'm based in Argentina, and I will be trying to moderate this webinar. So welcome again. And for those joining us for the first time, let me share a short introduction about who we are. The Global Alliance for Tax Justice is a South-led global coalition that was created in 2013, that we bring together regional tax justice networks in Asia, Africa, Latin America, Europe, and North America. Our members collectively represent hundreds of organizations around the world. And from that perspective, we at GACHE are clear that any solutions to the problems and challenges of the international tax system must reflect the voices of those who are directly harmed and affected in the Global South. I mean, workers, women, indigenous people, social movements, and young people. So together, we work for a progressive and redistributed taxation that reduces inequality within and between countries and that generates the public funding much needed to secure essential services and the realization of human rights. This commitment goes hand in hand with our technical rigor, and across our regions, we count on recognized experts, some of whom will be joining us today, who pair solid analysis with advocacy and campaigning around the world. For us at GACHE, effective international tax cooperation, I mean one that works differently from today's failing architecture, is a sine qua non condition to achieve the goals which I've mentioned. For over a decade, from GACHE and also the wider tax justice movement, we have warned across global forums and in every event we attend that the current tax system is governed by rules designed for the few, that it has not kept the pace with digitalization, for example, that it tolerates, let's say, large-scale avoidance and evasion by multinationals and high net worth individuals, that it drains resources through tax-related illicit financial flows that should finance education, health, infrastructure, climate, and gender equality, and also that it fuels disputes that are often settled in places where power is completely uneven for global South countries. In short, international tax cooperation remains a major gap, an unpaid debt in global economic governance. And as we all know, or not, over the past 15 years, the OECD has promoted what it calls the two-pillar approach. But despite all the effort, let's say, invested by the member states, mostly rich countries, and the so-called participation of developing ones through the inclusive framework, the process has failed to deliver. It ignores the interests and concerns of the Global South, and to be kind, it's stalled. Even as you have seen, major multinationals have now been exempted from some of the obligations contemplated. That's why we demand for a United Nations Framework Convention on International Tax Cooperation. And that's why this process has continually grown. The driving force behind this push of the United Nations tax cooperation has been the G77 that has been joined recently by the Africa Group, with growing support from academia, trade unions, and civil society around the world. The process, and that's why we are here, has moved forward in the UN. Our responsibility from civil society is to guarantee that this momentum turns into a robust convention with early protocols capable of providing the world with effective tools to repair the system black holes. This is, we think, a once-in-a-generation opportunity to rewrite the rules in a way that works for everyone. The official negotiations began at the UN headquarters in New York in August and will continue until mid-2027. As we may learn today from our panelists, the start of the substantial negotiations in August has not been exactly a step forward, but also has not been a step back either. So, with this context, we understand that the meetings in Nairobi that are taking place next week are pivotal. They are expected to make the start of the real negotiations, both in terms of substantive content and procedural clarity. While we understand that it's still early in the process and that no final agreement or negotiation text can be expected at this stage, we know that these sessions will be crucial in determining the trajectory of the process. So today, our panelists will help us mapping what's at stake and what this upcoming session must deliver. Again, thank you for being here. Let me remind everyone that interpretation in Spanish and French is available. Please do send questions in the chat at any time. We will collect them for the Q&A. And now it's my pleasure to invite our keynote speaker, Dereje Alemayehu, our executive coordinator, to offer a historical perspective on the road that brought us here. Dereje, you have 15 minutes, and I will kindly remind you when you are running like around the 3 last minutes. So the floor is yours, Dereje. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Thomas, for the brilliant introduction as well, in which you have also taken a lot of what I was about to speak about too. What I try to do is really, I will outline 5 main reasons why the reform was long overdue and why it is urgent to implement it. And then some 6 points what we should and we could expect from the tax convention as a solution to the existing problematic. The first reason why the convention is a timely and as Thomas said, a once-a-generation opportunity is because the current global tax rules and standards are totally outdated. Just if you look at the calendar, most of the rules were created by the League of Nations in the early 1920s, where many countries were not yet existent as political entities. They were under colonialism, and even the development, the way multinationals and companies organize their business was totally different from what it is today. Globalization and digitalization are just the 2 points which have come in the last decades, and the tax rules were not adapted to reflect this changed political and economic reality. So it was more than high time that they get changed. The second one is the rules. The global tax rules formulation excluded the global south. First, at the origin, because they were not yet politically independent, but after that, because the OECD took over the leadership in formulating these standards and rulemaking. So it was an exclusion of the vast majority of countries in today's world. So this exclusion is one of the reasons why we are calling for an inclusive international tax cooperation. The third point is the rules and standards have disadvantaged global south countries. Those who drafted the law made it a priority to follow their own and their multinationals' interests. Just to give an example, most of the rules and standards are based on residence principle, which means the countries in the global south who are usually source of the tax revenue were not entitled to the taxing rights for profits derived in their own countries. As a result, the current system exacerbates global inequalities, constraining the capacity of developing countries to mobilize domestic resources for certain development. The fourth point is OECD maintained its usurped dominance role in rulemaking and standard setting, although the UN first started to take over the role of the League of Nations. That was denied to it by the blockage of major OECD countries through initiatives like the BEPS process and the so-called inclusive framework. The OECD tried to reply to the critic of excluding others, but maintained the rule-making, decision-making process. So that is one of the reasons. A global issue, a global problem cannot be solved by the club of the rich. That is one of the reasons why the rule-making and standard setting should move away from the OECD back to the United Nations. And the fifth point I wanted to raise is the reform is the OECD has been promising and working on to not take into account the interests and priorities of the global South countries. The OECD recent tax reforms, including two-pillar solutions, have been widely criticized for failing to address the structural inequalities of the global tax system. These reforms were developed without adequately considering the fiscal realities, the administrative capacities, and developmental priorities of global South countries. They are complex and patchy and unenforceable, with implementation lagging even among powerful OECD members. So rather than offering meaningful change, these initiatives merely tweak the system at the margins, preserving the status quo and the dominance of the global north in the global tax governance. Just to give an example, one of the in propaganda, which seems to have solved the base erosion and profit shifting problematic, the pillar one, the scope covers only maximum 100 multinational companies, and it claims to enable sharing of only 10% of their global profit. So by any standards, it cannot be recognized as something that is fundamentally changing the broken tax system. So now to my second part, what do we hope to from the UN Tax Convention process? The first is the establishment of a robust international tax cooperation framework. The UN Tax Convention is a robust and equitable framework for international tax cooperation, grounded in the principles that the tax policy of one country should not erode the tax base of another. Such a framework must put an end to the loopholes and harmful practices that enable multinational corporations and wealthy individuals to shift profit and conceal wealth, depriving countries, especially in the global south, of vital resources for development. By promoting genuine cooperation instead of competition, the Convention can ensure that global taxation serves fairness and justice. The second is we hope the UN Tax Convention will establish a transparent and inclusive global governance system. A key expectation from the UN Tax Convention is the creation of a transparent, democratic, and inclusive system of global tax governance. Unlike the current exclusive arrangement dominated by the OECD countries, the Convention will ensure that all member states, large or small, have an equal voice in setting international tax norms and standards. This would make a historic step forward, dismantling the legacy of exclusion and inequality in the global tax rulemaking, and creates a legitimate rules-based platform where every country's interests and perspectives are respected. The third point is it will establish a global tax rules to curtail tax evasion and avoidance. It will lead to the establishment of clear, enforceable global tax rules that effectively curb tax evasion and avoidance by multinational corporations and the wealthy. It will harmonize standards for transparency, reporting, and accountability, ensuring that profits are taxed where economic activity actually occur. By closing the existing gaps and inconsistencies in the global tax system, the Convention can prevent the race to the bottom in corporate taxation and protect public revenue essential for social and economic development. The fourth is, even if it will not be directly the role of the Convention to formulate domestic level tax rules. The international context it creates will be conducive to progressive national tax systems. The enabling international environment will support and strengthen progressive national tax systems. Developing countries, in particular, need a policy space and international context to implement the fair taxation on income, wealth, and corporate profits without the fear of capital flight or retaliatory pressure. A just international framework can help countries align their domestic tax policies with redistributive goals, reduce inequality, and mobilize sustainable resources to advance human rights and social justice. The fifth is an agreed UN tax convention can establish a tax system aligned with the SDG and other UN agreements. The UN Tax Convention must embed the global tax system within the broader framework of sustainable development and international cooperation. It should ensure that global tax norms are consistent with the sustainable development goals, the other UN agreements and commitments on human rights, climate action, and gender equality. Aligning tax justice with these goals, global agendas, would transform taxation from a technical exercise into a powerful tool for financing equitable development and building a fairer global economy. Finally, the UN Tax Convention can create more policy and financial space for global South countries to determine their development and economic and social policy. The greater policy and financial autonomy it can grant to Southern countries will enable them to chart their own development paths without excessive dependence on debt and aid. Fair and inclusive international tax system would allow these countries to mobilize their own domestic resources by effectively taxing multinational corporations and wealthy individuals operating within their economies. This increased fiscal sovereignty would empower governments to invest in social protection, public services, and sustainable development. Development priorities based on national context and democratic choices, rather than being constrained by conditionalities of the IMF and the World Bank. So thank you very much. That is just an intro to the following debate from other panelists. Thank you very much.
Amazing, Dereje. Thank you very much. Thank you for respecting the time. The framing that you provided underlines both the urgency and the opportunity for us, and it takes us directly to Nairobi. So I've realized that I forgot to explain the webinar dynamics. So after Dereje's amazing keynote and introduction, let me now please introduce our panelists. We have Tove Maria Ryding. She is a tax justice manager at Eurodad. She's a member of the GACHE Coordinating Committee. Everlyn Muendo is the Senior Policy Lead on Tax and International Financial Architecture at Tax Justice Network Africa. Lison Rehbinder, our colleague, she is the Global Campaigns and Policy Coordinator for Europe in GACHE. Jeannie Manipon, the Co-Coordinator of Tax and Fiscal Justice Asia, and also Senior Program Manager for APMDD. And Luis Moreno, member of Red Justicia Fiscal for América Latina and Latin, and also the chair of the Global Alliance Coordinating Committee. Again, a quick reminder before jumping into our panelists. First round of intervention, please post the questions you have in the chat, and we will try to collect them for the Q&A. So Tove, I will start with you now that your camera is on. Welcome, thank you for joining us. So the convention is probably the most important text in the process, and it will be addressed and discussed within the members during the first week in Nairobi. Can you share with us some analysis of the draft text that has been published? What should we expect in the room in Nairobi? And what do you think that should be the key demands to negotiators as the conversations start? You have 5 minutes, Tove. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for organizing this and Thank you everyone for joining. Indeed, there's 3 work streams in the negotiations, and the first one is on the convention itself. And one of the great things that we have going for us in this process is that we finished last year with a quite ambitious mandate. And the objective of the convention is specified, and it's a very ambitious objective, and it includes the job of establishing an international tax system for sustainable development. That sentence has 2 components. It has tax, but it also has the link to sustainable development. And that was a key ask from our side. And now it's also a key part of how we should measure how it's going and what we should be demanding of our governments. And secondly, what to expect in the room in Nairobi. These are very early days. It's nothing short of a revolution what has happened. Suddenly we have a transparent negotiation where we can be in the rooms, but all governments are there, except the United States that left. But everybody else is there and discussing this issue together. And it's very clear that that is a very new thing. And countries are also still finding their feet. I think especially in the global north, and we'll get to the roles of the regions later. But one of the things that's keeping everyone together is that the issue of the failure of the tax system is something that impacts countries and people all over the planet. So there is a collective problem here, but there's also the mandate that they must be delivering on. And secondly, one big news is that we now have a first draft text. And that text comes very early in the process. It's quite a lot that we have a substantial text when it's basically only the second time they meet. It's the 3rd session, but they had the 2 sessions, 2 first ones back to back in New York in August. So it's the second time they see each other. If you want to say it's still very early times in the dating experience. And that's also very clear from the draft text, because the draft text is almost empty. It's very low on ambition. And the first thing to say about the text is that it does not establish an international tax system for sustainable development. For example, the paragraph on sustainable development is extremely top line and is nothing but what's copied from the mandate, from the terms of reference. The second thing that's interesting about the text is that it doesn't have any real multilateral solutions. And that's actually what this body can do. It can develop joint solutions among the governments. But if we look at the text, one of the key solutions that it prescribes is about exchange of information. But there you'll see that it's very vague language. There's no international mechanism to help this exchange, and the exchange is not even automatic information exchange. And so for over a decade, we've had international automatic information exchange facilitated by international agreements. But exactly as Dereje highlighted, this was developed by the OECD, and one of the big problems we have is that developing countries, to a large extent, didn't get access to these solutions, and it's not working for them. So we are at the level where we have automatic information exchange, but we need to go a big step further in creating solutions where all countries are equal and can benefit on equal terms. So this is just to show that the text is very, very far from where it needs to be. But this is not necessarily surprising at this stage. What needs to happen in Nairobi is that the member states need to start delivering on the mandate. And one important reason for them to be the ones that need to be held accountable is that the mandate says the process should be member state led. It's the governments that need to come and propose the solutions that they should deliver on the mandate. And it's the governments that need to find each other and start negotiating. And we're coming out of a period where they have been meeting on Zoom. And these have been very close meetings where we have not been invited. But the way UN processes happen, it's not something that you can do on Zoom, because we really need to see engagement in good faith. And we need to see a situation where they don't just state the positions that they had when the negotiations started. They need to listen to each other and start developing joint solutions. As civil society, of course, we're also, we've done our homework. And I think if you look at the positions, the civil society positions are probably the most elaborated. But we have a number of very, very clear suggestions that entail a fundamental reform of the global corporate tax system to deliver on the part of the mandate that says that they will ensure equitable taxation of multinational enterprises. That both includes a new way of taxing companies, but it also includes transparency, including to allow the public to see how much tax multinational corporations are paying in each country where they operate. We also have concrete proposals on high net worth individuals. And again, the mandate says they promise that they would tax high net worth individuals effectively. So there needs to be taxation of the world's richest. On sustainable development, we have a number of proposals, including introducing polluter pays taxes on the richest individuals and corporations in the world. And there we also have some decisions that they have made already in the financing for development process, where they said they would explore an issue like gender responsive taxation. So we're also coming to Nairobi and saying, great, you said you would do this. Now is the time to start delivering on that. So those are the things that we're coming to Nairobi with. And I think we're bringing a lot of proposals and a lot of colleagues. But Nairobi will be absolutely crucial for getting the governments into the real working phase, where they put forward their proposals for how to solve these problems, and we will be putting forward our proposals with them. But then we also need to see the real engagements between all countries at the table. And that, at the end of the day, that's what's going to give us multilateral solutions. And we're going to have to make sure that they deliver on the mandate that they promised that they would follow. So I'll hold there, but thank you very much.
Thank you, Tove. Great to hear all what you have to share with us. I will now move to Jeannie. Jeannie, as Tove mentioned, and as we all know, the terms of reference, hi Jeannie, the roadmap that was agreed last year included a commitment that international tax cooperation, that this process must contribute to sustainable development in all its dimensions. So I think we all share that this is a very relevant issue that gives us space to address, among other issues, the gender and ecological implications of this process. So as we know, tax and gender have been a really important focus for the tax justice movement for a long time. And also we have seen now that tax and climate movements are working more and more together. So what's at stake for gender in the convention? And regarding climate, especially with the overlapping sessions between Belém and Nairobi, what's also at stake regarding climate, and what are our key demands as civil society in these two issues? And you have 5 minutes to answer and to elaborate around all these, so please go ahead, Jeannie.
Thank you, Tomás. I might be repeating some of the important points that have already been talked about. We have very high expectations from Nairobi, despite the challenges that we have seen also. The future UN Tax Convention should serve, we believe, should serve as an important instrument for enabling governments and the entire international community to effectively address gender inequality and realize women's human rights. It should be one of the important instruments. There are many ways by which a UN tax convention can play a role, ensuring a fair international tax system and addressing corporate tax abuses should yield more resources for governments to finance essential and quality public services, especially for health and education, that are very important in achieving gender equality. Building on the FFD4 outcome document this year, we have the opportunity now to aim higher and work towards integrating gender dimensions in the UN Tax Convention, setting global standards on what a gender-responsive taxation should look like, and making this an integral part of the Framework Convention. The UN Tax Convention process, which takes place at the very exact same time as COP30 in Belém, reminds us that this is also a huge opportunity to make taxes really work for the planet. At least 2 or 3 fundamental points should be well integrated in the future UN Tax Convention's main text. One is progressive environmental taxation. Environmental taxation should be part of a comprehensive progressive tax system. The current mainstream practices in environmental taxation in many parts of the world tend to place the burden on consumers and ordinary people, which is very regressive. Another one is the principle of making polluters pay. And more specifically, I believe Tove mentioned this briefly, civil society proposals to introduce a global surtax on the fossil fuel industry at an increasing rate, and using revenues to address inequalities and financing urgent climate action. Another third point is taxing high net worth individuals. So the wealth accumulation by a very select few wealthy people in the planet is an international problem that bears the history and the marks of huge ecological footprints at the expense of the planet and at the cost of ordinary people. It is really a matter of economic and environmental justice that, just like making the fossil fuel industry pay their just share, high net worth individuals should also be taxed fairly, sharply, and progressively, and revenues collected should be directed towards addressing inequalities and the climate crisis. But let me say also that the narrative of just transition to a fossil-free future should not be used or abused to justify the expansion of extractivist practices of corporations. So, for example, in the extraction of minerals that are deemed critical to transition, or the so-called transition minerals, or strengthening what we sometimes call the corporate capture of the energy agenda, or even the search for alternative sources of energy. And let me take this opportunity to share with you that together with our partners and comrades in Brazil and South Africa, APMDD is holding a hybrid event that links Belém and Nairobi on the 12th of November to draw attention to what we call greenwashing of illicit financial flows and greenwashing of extractivism and the role of corporate power in this dynamic. Now, this, we hope, will tackle the complex nexus of tax, climate, and energy issues that should also be fed back into the discussions on the UN Tax Convention. So please save the date. That will be November 12, 12:30 noon to 2 p.m. at the University of Para in Belém, and at the same time linking it to Nairobi at 6:30 p.m. in Nairobi. This for now, Tomás, and I'll be happy to engage in the discussion later.
Thank you, Jeannie, very much for that perspective. The gender, all the Sustainable Development Agenda is really relevant for the ongoing discussions. We are looking forward to the event you are organizing, and let me get back to the specifics of the convention and invite Everlyn Muendo. Everlyn, alongside the convention, we are seeing the negotiation of 2 early protocols that are in play. And you are now our expert in Protocol 1 that covers taxation of income from cross-border services in an increasingly digitalized, globalized economy, so the digital economy. And if I'm not mistaken, you could correct me, please, we should not expect a line-by-line negotiations in Nairobi, but rather an update on what they have been discussing. So what's at stake from your perspective in this protocol, And can you elaborate a little bit on what's currently being discussed? Welcome.
Thank you. I hope you can hear me clearly. Unfortunately, I have to use both my laptop as well as my phone in order to be able to participate. Can you hear me clearly? If I can just get a thumbs up. So Protocol 1 is particularly important for developing countries because cross-border services, and particularly the digitalization of cross-border services, have been a significant area of tax-based erosion for the continent. And for that reason, it's particularly important for the African group amongst other global South countries. So for us, the most important thing, even within this protocol, is that we make sure that for the first time, we negotiate the fair allocation of taxing rights on cross-border services as a group, and that we also make sure, can you still hear me clearly? Yes, and we also make sure that we are also, sorry, someone is trying to call me. And that we also make sure that for the very first time, we come up with a proper and universal inclusive multilateral solution towards the taxation of the digital economy following the failure of particularly Pillar 1 Amount A. So it's very important that we also try our best to come up with, at the very least, even if we don't get the support from the US, we build a coalition, especially amongst the global South, or a coalition of the willing, of people who are willing to come up with a harmonized approach of taxing both services as well as the digital services, as well as the digital economy. And so the other very important thing, I would say, particularly for this protocol, is making sure that whatever solution that we propose aligns even with the least administrable, with the least capacitated tax administration that we have in developing countries. Because one of the issues that we've had in the past before is going for very complex or going for very complex, sorry. So going for very complex or going for very complex solutions that are very difficult to administer for developing countries, and which result in a situation whereby you have a good solution, yes, but in order to implement that solution, the administrative costs would far outweigh the revenue that would end up being collected through that solution. So it's very, very important that we also look into making sure that we come up with solutions that are simple and easy to administer, even as we're discussing what we want out of Protocol 1. And I think the other very important point is that we have to still make sure that even the best ideas that are in Protocol 1 are just not limited to Protocol 1, but rather they are limited to but rather they are also transferred or shared with the Framework Convention. So I'll give an instance. In Protocol 1, we're discussing the taxation of intergroup services. And so for that reason, we're looking into the question of the transfer pricing system and whether the arm's length principle is still necessary, considering the challenges and the complexities that we faced. And one of the solutions that we're discussing is the proposal of coming up with unitary taxation and formulary apportionment. And I think this is something that should not just be limited to Protocol 1, but it's something that should also be discussed within the Framework Convention. So that is the other goal that we have. But rather than that, I would say those are the main points: coming up with solutions that are easy to administer, even for the least capacitated tax administration within the continent and amongst the global South. The other proposed solution is finally coming up with new nexus rules, which has been one of the biggest challenges when it comes to taxation of the digital economy. doing away with physical presence, and finally giving multilateral recognition to the concept of significant economic presence, which has been something that many developing countries have already been implemented, and also ensuring, even as we're discussing Protocol 1, that there will be fair allocation of taxing rights, and that we're going to negotiate this, particularly as the Global South, as a bloc, to make sure that we're protecting our taxing rights as source countries. And I would say, yeah, that is a summary of what we hope to get out of Protocol 1, even though these discussions will mostly happen in the February session. We're still looking at this process, and we're still making sure that everything goes well, even as we go into the November sessions. Thank you, Tomás.
No, thank you, Everlyn. Really, really interesting. Let's just prepare for next questions regarding all of these items that you have been mentioning, because we already having some questions around what should next rule look like, and for example, and many other issues. But now let's move into Protocol 2 with my friend and colleague Lison, joining us from France. Lison, the second protocol, the second early protocol, focuses on dispute prevention and dispute resolution, and it will be addressed during the second week in Nairobi. And we also know now that we have an issue now that has been shared. So, where are these discussions on Protocol 2 heading, and what are civil society's expectations for Nairobi around this? You have the floor for 5 minutes, Lison. Thank you.
Thank you, Tomás. Hello, everyone. So on dispute prevention and resolution, it's first important to remind ourselves that this protocol was defined as the second early protocol because Global North countries wanted to prioritize it. And maybe just restate what are the current issues we have with tax disputes. The real barrier to effective dispute prevention and resolution lies in the current corporate tax system. So in our analysis, the root of the issue on disputes don't come from the mechanism, but from the corporate tax system itself. This system of corporate tax rules are built around transfer pricing and the arm's length principle. So they assume that different subsidiaries of the same multinational can be taxed as if they were independent companies. This is a fiction, and it generates confusion, loopholes, and endless conflict about where the profits are really made and who gets to tax them. It's a system that is outdated, opaque, unfair, and it produces a lot of dispute. The system also currently relies on thousands of bilateral tax treaties, which are negotiated unequally, and it's producing a fragmented system with a lot of power imbalances. So this overall system is producing a lot of disputes because it prevents countries to taxing corporate income effectively. And the problem we have right now with this protocol is that the direction it seems to be taking is more about finding sticky solutions that rather than recognizing that and addressing this overall underlying problem. As civil society, our position has consistently to call for fixing the overall system, not just managing its consequences. It would mean replacing transfer pricing and the arm's length principle with a system to tax corporation that is effective. So we are advocating for a long time for unitary taxation with formulary apportionment. It means that multinational will be treated as single global entities, and there would be tax when they have real economic activities with factors including workers, sales, assets. If we have this system and if we ensure transparency through public country by reporting, it would resolve and prevent a lot of the dispute that we have. So many of this work relates to the work that is currently happening under Workstream 1 and the Convention. And we believe that elaborating on the commitment of the Convention is a priority also to solve dispute and also relating to Workstream 3. In the TOR for the Convention, One of the commitments is the fair allocation of taxing rights, including equitable taxation of multinational enterprises. And this should be really reflecting in all the work that we are doing also for this protocol. So where the discussions are heading in Nairobi. The colleagues, as you said, Tomás, they have now shared a note. For the first part of the year, they were scoping on the problem, and now they are sharing a note identifying potential solutions. But most of what is being proposed, it remains under the same paradigm. The underlying assumption is that the transfer pricing system is here to stay, while it is the main reason that disputes arise in the first place. The note suggests that the protocol should be built around optionality, where countries can choose which dispute mechanism they would join and implement. It would keep the existing bilateral treaty framework. And the protocol also proposed in this, the note from the colleagues to improve some processes like mutual agreement procedure and to allow for arbitration as an optional tool. There are a lot of concerns here. Optionality can sound inclusive, but in practice, it still means that we will create a fragmented system. And we believe that the main reason for this process, for the convention process, is to build a broad agreement and create a consistent and coherent international system. It's also concerning if optionality is also there to promote some tools like arbitration that are one big red flag for many countries, especially in the global south. They clearly stated that they are opposed to it in the last August session. Many have experiences with investor-state arbitration and this has shown that these mechanisms are problematic. They can undermine public interest. For developing countries, it's very costly with biased proceedings. So we don't want this protocol to promote some solutions that are very dangerous for developing countries. The note also points out that information sharing and transparency are important tools to prevent dispute. And on that, we agree. We agree that transparency is an important solution, mainly for prevention, but then we should insist on the importance of public CBCR, while the note focuses more on comparable databases, which are databases to show transfer pricing examples. And we also believe here that this is a false assumption because the fundamental problem is that corporations carry out transactions for which there are no comparable transactions. So looking ahead to Nairobi, it's really important that we remind negotiators that we want to and need to fix the system and not just manage its consequences. This is how we would move from dispute management to dispute prevention, by building coherence, fairness, and transparency in the global system. And we can hope that the discussion on Protocol 2, which will happen in the second week after an extensive discussion on Protocol 1, on the convention and the key commitment, will benefit from ambitious discussion, and that the negotiators will not only look at technical and patchy solutions, but really work for an ambitious overhaul. Thank you, Tomás.
Thank you, Lison. Thank you very much. And now I will give the floor to Luis Moreno. He will be speaking in Spanish. So if you want to switch to the Spanish channel to hear our interpreter's translation, Luis, welcome. Bienvenido, Lucho. Desde la sociedad
Thanks,
civil.
Tomás. As Tomás said, I will speak in Spanish, so please, if you can turn your...
Yes.
Oh. Yes.
Gracias, Luis.
Thank you, Luis.
Entiendo que la mayoría ya
I understand
deben
that
haber
most
pasado
people
al
probably
canal.
already
Dame
changed
un
their
segundo.
channels.
Let's
Give me
one more
1 second.
for people.
Luis, from civil society, we have been carrying out campaigns and actions around the world to achieve the creation of this process for years, a long time now. And we have participated both of the conversations of the terms of reference last year and in the first negotiation sessions. So I wanted to ask you, what do you understand from the agache and Latin American perspective is the role of civil society in this process. How has the engagement been so far? And what can we expect of what's happening in Nairobi for civil society? You have 5 minutes to answer this. Okay, thank you so much, Tomás. And I wanted to greet everyone. Well, look, I think that the role that has been played by civil society throughout the years for the push and creation of this process in the last few decades has been very important. We have had a long, hard work of incidents of advocacy, mobilization, research, proposals, and challenges to be able to have this process that we have currently be tangible. We have had a lot of work in which the evolution throughout the years regarding the process has it needed to try to involve not just the organizations that work in the spaces of tax justice, but also a wider space with several organizations, movements, both union movements, regional movements, and fight movements also for human rights, for gender equality, also the fight against the impacts of climate effects of the industries based on fossil energies that damage the environment and the rights of the populations. So there's been quite a work from civil society. And since its implementation, and now with the convention and this achievement, it is very important and fundamental for us to approach civil society, because civil society is also an engine for the improvement of decision making and accountability. The role of civil society, I consider that has been also crucial due to different reasons. Well, we have already stated here, say during the presentations, some important aspects, mainly the fight against a tax system that is obsolete, that makes our countries have difficulties, particularly countries in the global south, to retrieve enormous resources, tax resources for public policies, for human rights, as has already been mentioned. So the role of civil society has also been very important because first, it's been important to advocate for tax justice in general, because it also brings legitimacy to the system. It represents the interest of the people itself and the most affected communities, both by tax evasion and tax injustice, but also the different effects that have been happening throughout the years. On the other hand, I also think, and I considered, that in a way it enriches the debate. It brings, as we've heard, and we have seen it in the global articulation, to enrich this debate, it brings a lot of technical experience. And its connection also with the social and economical implications of public policies has been very relevant. The valuable and diverse knowledge and inputs of the different proposals that have been increasing and have been addressed are crucial. And also crucial for the governments to have some options outside of the current taxing system that are out there, that, as was stated in the objectives, currently it's the need of having an inclusive, efficient, fair, transparent taxing system that's equitable and for sustainable development is not really happening. So otherwise we put it as an objective of this convention. But so we need to change taxing rules for the benefit of everyone in similar conditions. So we need a robust convention, and the enrichment of this debate, the input that civil society has is one of the key purposes, so that the governments, in a way, can assume some proposals and are also better prepared to answer to the challenges and realities that we are facing currently. And actually, the Framework Convention offers that space. And it's also going to be strengthened. I think that it's also an important space for the accountability, because civil society has played the role of surveilling party, ensuring also that, or overseeing party, ensuring that the governments or other actors have a specific responsibility on the commitments that they're assuming or that they should assume in this process. And also, the engagement of civil society in this process, I think, contributes with transparency. Because the development of this taxing convention of the UN with civil engagement also allows for a wider dissemination, discussion, debate regarding the decisions that are being taken by the delegates or the representatives that are participating of this process in the UN. And it also provides a certainty that the rules in that order should aim for or be aligned with the objectives and principles that are aimed to be continue to be addressed in this convention. So in this framework, I also consider that civil society should continue to contribute with their experience, technical experience, with their articulation experience, both in terms of social mobilization with the different unions, the different social movements, the regional movements, communities that are also affected, participating also in similar conditions, equal conditions with other actors, and contributing actively in the creation of this convention. Because the engagement of civil society is within this process is supported by a mandate of the General Assembly of the UN that encourages the relevant stakeholders in the negotiations of the convention. So, to don't take too much of the time, I'm going to stop here.
Gracias, Luis. Thank you very much. We can now get back to the English channel. I think your intervention, Lucho, has been really important to address how this process has been pushed and followed by civil society and the relevance of our interventions along the process. Again, this couldn't have been possible without the organizations from the Global South, like the ones organizing this webinar today together with the GACHE Secretariat, I mean, Tax Justice Network Africa, Red Justicia Fiscal, and Tax and Fiscal Justice Asia, also our global members like Eurodad and the North American membership. So I propose to make a second round of questions to try to have a better understanding of the regional positionings on the road to Nairobi. So Everlyn, if you are still around and you want to connect your double system, I would like to bring you to the regional work. Are you there, Everlyn? If not, I'll jump to Jeannie. Okay. So Everlyn, when you're back, please turn on your camera and we'll invite you to make your intervention. So Jeannie.
Okay.
Hi again. How are you?
Hi. Yeah,
So
fine.
let me bring you to regional issues. So many Asian countries have voted for the terms of reference to start with this process. How do you see their engagement now? And what would you say that are the priorities from Asian countries?
Thank you for the question. Not all 8 countries in Asia voted for the terms of reference, like Japan, but we know that there are many civil society organizations that are also pushing their government to rethink its position. But governments and peoples in Asia should realize that we have a huge stake in this convention. The future UN Tax Convention, if done right, can be a vital tool for addressing many problems in Asia that we have witnessed for years. No? Rising inequalities that lead to social discontent. As you know, we have seen an explosion of social unrest in many parts of the region. You saw Nepal, you saw Indonesia. In the Philippines, we also have it in to the bone, as we sometimes say, on a constant, almost everyday basis. At the center of the web of issues is the issue of public finance. So how it is used, how it is generated, who benefits from it. And part of that are the issues of fiscal and tax systems. So the problems of debt and tax abuses by corporations and elites that bleed our public coffers, the problem of tax systems that bear the marks of colonial legacies and are designed to protect the interests of elites and the profits of corporations, and with deeply embedded gender biases. The role of tax systems historically to facilitate the transfer of wealth and profit from the global south, the south source countries that many of our countries in Asia are part of, to transfer of wealth and profit from the global south to the north. So people's movements and civil society in Asia and the champions of justice among our governments, where are you? We hope you are there, should really actively engage in the UN Tax Convention process because we have a huge stake in it. Journalists and like you, Tomás, and civil society have a big role to play in urging governments to proactively engage this process, to align with and strengthen solidarity among countries of the global south, to seize this historical opportunity to protect our interests and the interests of the planet and ensure that the future UN Tax Convention will truly work in the interests of peoples and countries of the global south, who have disproportionately borne the consequences and impacts of many historical injustices and a deeply flawed international tax architecture that the UN Tax Convention should now transform. So that's it for me, Tomás. Thank you.
No, thank you, Jeannie. You touched a sensible fiber from my early time as a journalist. I completely agree on the relevance of getting media interested and committed to follow this process, and our interaction from the civil society with media in the regions. It's also really relevant. Thank you for flagging your regional perspective. I will now be back to Luis. So again, please, all of you who need interpretation, please change to the Spanish channel.
Luis, I wanted to ask you also about the role of the countries in Latin America in the process. I mean, in the past and in the current situation. Also ask you how the political transformations in the region may affect that engagement. And in spaces like Petelac, how are they going to push this negotiation in the UN? Yeah, well, thank you, Tomás, for the question. I want to echo everything that was already mentioned by Jeannie in her intervention, and the need also to try to address the main causes or consequences in our countries currently. In the case of Latin America, there is a huge spill of resources, both due to evasion and illusion, and that is around almost 70% of the regional GDP, which is huge, particularly in a context where poverty and extreme poverty is around 35%. the informality, meaning the people that stay in the margins of the formal system, is around 60% in the region, where the implementation of taxing policies is quite regressive, where the tax expenditure has a high level of representativity, around 5% of the regional GDP, and where it seems like the adjustments due to austerity and the high levels of indebtedness are the constant rule that is played within our countries. So in that framework, as we have mentioned, the role of the tax policy is crucial for the reduction of inequalities and the financing of public policies. What is being done in Latin America regarding this process that encompasses all that we have mentioned, and what is the opportunity to address this work within the tax convention within Latin America? Say the countries, as I understand, have had a crucial role in the region. Even though a few years back, the tax platform for Latin America was created, which is an articulation space that is quite important in political terms. It has advanced strongly to try to achieve the visualization of the main issues that our countries are facing. There are some priority challenges, common challenges that are being articulated or reviewed, and seeing that there is an urgent need to tackle them, at least in terms of environmental taxing and what is represented by tax expenditure and so on. In that framework also, there's been an engagement of civil society, which is also contributing to this debate. And in that framework, what we are aiming for is to try to address, in one way or another, try to look for joint positions, how to move forward in these challenges in the region, and some kind of political articulation that can, in a way, try to visualize or replicate what at some point the African Union represents for Africa. This whole articulation process, regional process in Africa, has been one of the examples, one of the ideals that was had within the PTLAC in order to structure this whole process in Latin America. So from there, currently, the pro tempore chair in Brazil has addressed as a challenge all of this theme agenda. And from there, there's been movement forward in trying to organize this regional effort with some important points of the agenda, regional agenda, to address the challenges or tax evasion and elusion and some important matters to adopt important elements regarding, for example, how to address uh, wealth taxes, and also the need, as was mentioned, to have proposals for incentivizing the impacts of high development of fossil fuels. And there's been very specific demands in the fight against illegal financial flows. So from there, even though there is an intent to address this articulation, this theme articulation, it's a process that is going to take a while. I feel personally, probably, with the next meetings that are going to be had throughout the process of the tax convention, we hope that the main demands and problems are seen within this regional articulation, and that are also elevated as a regional proposal, hopefully with some sort of regional articulation regarding this topic. So it's important to underscore also that the role of the regional civil society or civil society that are part of the Platform Coordination Council. They contribute with proposals, which is what they have been doing, and also with concrete initiatives. One of the important demands that has been raised from there is the need that the tax systems are progressive, fair, and that they also have a clear element connected to the impacts on race and gender, which is one of the important elements, and that has also been taken as one of the important demands by the pro tempore chair of Brazil for these efforts. We still have many challenges within the region. The articulation is starting. Hopefully, say all of these demands can be, as you said, articulated, but there's also the need to continue to advocate internally, regionally, so that this is possible. So this very, very fast.
Please now get back to the English channel. We will go to Africa, back to Everlyn. She promised me she is there. Everlyn, are you around? We are really looking forward for, there you are, my friend. Welcome back, Everlyn. Do you have your audio back as well?
Yes, can you hear me clearly?
We
Yes.
can hear you perfectly. So you are one of the leading roles today. So let us or illuminate us about what has been happening around Africa, because as we all know, the Africa Group has led the process from the outset, before even the terms of reference negotiations. So have there been any changes in the positioning of the Africa Group? How do you read the current African priorities and engagement, and now that we are moving to the negotiations to Nairobi?
Firstly, I'm very excited about moving the negotiations to Nairobi. For anyone who was involved during the development of the terms of reference, moving the negotiations to Nairobi was a very deliberate effort of the African Group to make sure that not only is the outcome of the Framework Convention as inclusive as possible, but also the process of developing that Framework Convention is as inclusive as possible. So for the first time, we'll be having international tax negotiations in the Global South on African soil. And I'm really looking forward to welcoming all of you in Nairobi within the next week. So welcome. I think the position of the African Group has always been clear from the very onset. The position is that we want to address the historical imbalance of taxing rights, that the resident source principle has not been working in favor of many Global South countries, particularly Africa. We want to address tax-related illicit financial flows, and we want an international tax governance system that is universal and inclusive. Now, throughout the negotiations this year, the position of the African Group has remained the same. It's just we're doubling down, tripling down on these positions, and we're essentially playing both on the offensive and defensive side of safeguarding some of these provisions. And you'll find that one of the most key, for instance, commitments for the African Group has been the commitment on fair allocation of taxing rights, where essentially we're trying to come up with a commitment that is going to ensure that everywhere where economic activity takes place, that country or that jurisdiction, actually that country, that state will have the right to impose taxes on whatever income comes out of that economic activity. And that's very, very central, particularly also within the context of the digital economy, where we can see that now multinational enterprises are able to carry out economic activity and generate quite substantial revenue from our countries without having to pay any taxes there as per the way the international tax rules are structured right now. The other very important one is, of course, addressing tax-related illicit financial flows. And we aren't just talking about the need to do this, but for the African group, we're also talking about the how. The how is very important for us, and how we can address tax-related illicit financial flows is through tax transparency. So we're calling for public country-by-country reporting. We're calling for tax transparency standards that work for us. We're calling for the revisiting of those tax transparency standards, or at the very least, a grace period in order to adhere to those standards, even as we try and get all the technological as well as data frameworks in place, we still get a chance to access that. We're calling for special and differential treatment in relation to tax transparency, particularly exchange of information as well as country-by-country reporting. And you can see that the African group has been consistent in these various calls. They have been consistent since even before 2024, when we were negotiating the terms of reference, on what particularly we'd like to get from the Framework Convention. I think the issue is, and the greatest barrier to successfully including all these calls within the Framework Convention has been the lack of political support from other regions, particularly from the Global North. So we end up with a compromise, or we end up with a watered down provision. And I think as we go forward, that's going to be one of the biggest challenges as we move on. So for instance, right now, the position of the African group is we do not want arbitration. We don't think arbitration is a good idea under Workstream 3. And the irony is, unlike what most people think, the greatest victims of the ISDS system, which is the Investor State Dispute Resolution System, the greatest victims, the ones who have been actually losing out, is European countries, and particularly Global North countries. And any sane statesman from any country will tell you that they do not enjoy ceding their sovereignty through arbitration processes. However, within Workstream 3, we still aren't getting the kind of political support, particularly from Global North countries, even though they're the least impacted, on not putting mandatory arbitration in there. So for me, I think it's not even a technical issue. We're still in the political support. We're still on the political support issue, and we need more support, particularly from other regions, particularly from the Global North, in order to ensure we actually have progressive and ambitious provisions within the Framework Convention as well as the protocols. We need to safeguard against the watering down of the initial the initial ambition that we had, and we need to avoid compromise for the sake of international cooperation, because it's compromise simply to maintain the status quo, which is clearly not working, not only for African countries, but also Global North countries. I think it's time that we have very honest advocacy on some of these issues, because I know it's not good to bet, it's probably even illegal. I am willing to bet right now that when you look at the number of ISD cases and the countries that lose out, even if we were to use AI, which I don't encourage right now, you will find that the most impacted countries are Global North countries. It's not African countries, perhaps Latin American countries follow second, but it's definitely not African countries. So my question to us as civil society is, what are we doing wrong that we aren't able to get political support for things that are clearly evidenced to be affecting our countries? Like, what do we need to do? How do we need to revisit our advocacy strategies? Why would Germany, of all countries, that is currently experiencing the repercussions of ISDS, be in support of mandatory arbitration in something that is so important for the sovereignty of any country, which is taxation? Why will they decide to still cede the economic sovereignty in such a manner? What do we need to do in Germany in order to garner more support for moving away not only from ISDS, but also from mandatory arbitration within the context of taxation. So it's something that I think we need to have more discussions on, particularly because Work Stream 3 is going to also be essentially dominating the discussions that we're going to have in November. So I'm hoping we can have more talks about this when people come to Nairobi. I'm going to try and end on a positive note. I think also as civil society, we have to be willing to be flexible with regard to our advocacy strategies and to move with the waves of these negotiations. So unlike our initial strategy, which is we must support the African group, we must provide technical support, we must also ask, what can we do to also ensure that my country, regardless of where I come from, at the end of the day, signs a good instrument? Because even if all 54 African countries of Africa sign this instrument, it won't take force. At the end of the day, we're looking for a multilateral instrument. So what can I do to make sure France, to make sure Germany, to make sure Brazil, to make sure South Africa signs a good instrument and supports progressive measures within this? It's not just about supporting what I would call, excuse me for using football terms, the strikers of this process, who are the African group, but it's also making sure the midfielder, the defender, the goalkeeper plays their role. I'm so sorry for using football terms. So we must ask ourselves, what can we do to make sure everyone is playing their role? And what can we do to make sure we garner more support at national level and regional level for what the African group is trying to do? Because we have been consistent from the very beginning about what it is that we want out of this process. And quite honestly, it's not just to the benefit of us, but to the rest of the countries in the world. So thank you, Tomás. And I'm so sorry
No,
for taking
thank
a little
you.
longer.
Thank you, Everlyn. Your passion is always contagious. Thank you for using football metaphors for coming from Argentina as a world champion. It's really comfortable to hear them. And let's have one last question, Tove, on what's going on in Europe and the global north, which had been maybe, let's say, reluctant to launch and to move forward with this process as their involvement with the OECD. So what's your sense, what you're feeling on the current positions of the regions? Is there like different positionings inside Europe and the global north? And if you can take 1 minute to share with us what's your reading on the US leaving the negotiations so far. So we have 4 minutes left in the webinar, but feel free to use all of them because it's really important. Thank you.
No, thank you so much. I think the summary of what I'm about to say is that now is a really great time to follow up on Everlyn's encouragement and really engage with especially the Europeans. Yes, the United States is out of the UN tax negotiations, of the climate negotiations, of human rights, and the United States does what they do, they left. The difference between the UN tax convention and the OECD process is that the UN did not allow the United States to write the convention before they left. That's the mistake that the OECD tends to do. It's very normal at the UN that the rest of the world makes an agreement, the rest of the world starts moving forward, and then the United States comes afterwards. So we were definitely not unhappy to see the United States leave before the agreement was written rather than right after it's finalized. Because they do tend to dominate the negotiations if they are in the room, but they still don't sign and follow the rules. The EU is not one group. We have some of the world's biggest tax havens in the EU, And they also steal money from the other countries in the global north, including other EU countries. So those two groups have opposite economic interests. And the high tax countries in the EU have more in common with all the other countries in the world that are losing out because of tax havens than they do with the tax havens inside the EU. We do have some of, for example, the Netherlands and Luxembourg and Ireland are within the EU. We have Switzerland right next door. So we're starting to see that in the negotiations very clearly because the EU is no longer negotiating as a group. They have diversified. We also have countries in the EU that are not headquarter countries. It's a bit technical, but basically they have a strong interest in getting a different type of allocation of taxing rights than what the OECD has suggested. OECD has suggested to reward the countries where the headquarters are. So especially in Central and Eastern Europe, we have a group of countries that have more in common with the Global South than they do with the Western Europe. So, but this, the EU is very confused, and they often it's very, they're only just starting to talk about tax. They've been talking about process until now, so it's a perfect time for all of us to engage with them and help them work out their detailed positions on tax and try to remind them that we're there to do an international tax system for sustainable development. Last comment, just because we have some really excellent questions in the chat, and I can see we won't have time to answer them. But just on super questions, value creation, yes, the civil society position is that we should delete the term value creation. It's very unclear, and there's a risk that, for example, tax avoidance via patents can be linked to value creation. Long story short, yes, value creation out. And the nexus discussion, Everlyn touched on it. The issue of significant economic presence is important. But also, if we transition to taxing corporations on their global profits and have an allocation of the profits, then it becomes a new system. And there we might also want to look at different nexuses for different sectors. This is a bit technical, but just to say we're basically supporting a fundamental reform, and it should be supported by public country-by-country reporting, transparency around where companies do business and what they pay in tax, so that we can see what the impacts of different types of allocations would be. Great question. Last one on human rights. Yes, it's addressed in the principles in the mandate. The civil society position is that the tax convention, the link to sustainable development, should also include a commitment to ensure that the tax convention supports all the other commitments that governments have taken on related to sustainable development. But for us, that also includes human rights obligations and environmental obligations and social protection. So, and also the rights of people with disabilities. So we are trying to link the tax convention to the broader agenda of the UN on sustainable development. That's also my very brief answer to the question, what are our asks on sustainable development? We have a lot, including on a special tax on polluting industries and fossil fuel companies. And oh, that was one last thing. Sorry, there was a question about whether the tax on polluting industries would be a payment for the right to pollute. And no, what we are, and next week we're launching a report on this. We're suggesting that we have a tax that increases and becomes higher and higher, so that it tracks the global commitment to phase out fossil fuels. So we're very conscious of the fact that the tax system needs to reinforce the commitments on climate, environment, and the human rights and the broader social agenda of the UN. I'll hold there. That was the best I could do in a few minutes. Thank you.
Amazing, Tove. Thank you very much. Thank you for making the closing of this webinar way much easier for me. As Tove mentioned, she almost ran through every question that were made, but as you see, we are over the time. We've seen all the questions submitted. We think they are really good ones. I think our ambition has made us run out of time, and we won't have time to provide answers more in depth for each one. But we've taken note. Beyond what Tove has answered, we will make sure to address them in upcoming exchanges and calls from the working group. You can join if you are not there yet. We truly appreciate your time and the attention you invested joining this discussion. We know that we are still early in the process that will run to 2027, so ambition in Nairobi really matters, and civil society, we in civil society, are fully mobilized. Nearly over 100 of us will be there on the ground between and during the sessions. So please follow our updates and our member updates from the negotiations, and let's keep connected. Thank you, Dereje. Thank you, Luis, Tove, Jeannie, Everlyn, Lison. Also, thanks to the interpreters and all the participants. And no, I don't know, Dereje, if you turn your camera because you want to make a comment by closing, but no, then see you all in Nairobi. Thank you very much. This has been wonderful.